All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar from TCAPS called Trouble with TCAPS using MITRE attack, threat intelligence, and FAIR, factor analysis of information risk for better risk analysis. My name is Stephen Marshowitz, Director of Program Development here at TCAPS. And first, a few housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded, so you'll have that available for you on our YouTube page, and you can check that out with all of our other webinars. And definitely make sure you ask questions. We have the comment section, but also the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we get to those at the end. So a little bit about TCAPS. In looking across the full life cycle of your program, one of the things that we try and do is give you a more holistic or end-to-end type of assessments and support for your program. So we help with building, with risk, program, and compliance reviews, testing it, which is not only penetration testing, but cloud platform testing, customized testing, red teaming, et cetera, purple teaming, et cetera. Fixing, remediation of those issues, which, there's a lot of little things that pop up, especially with the complications of technology. And finally, responding to any incidents you have. Here are a few services aligned with that life cycle, and just to call out a couple of them that are hot right now and actually in our presenters area. The first is the MITRE Attack Path Effectiveness Review. And this has really been popular and really innovated by Rockie here. And it goes over really do you have the right tools in place, the right coverage? Do you have too many tools? Can you reduce some of that to save costs? And then what about the talent? How do you align the talent and your resource constraints that can result in your security team being less effective? So it really gives you a good holistic view of that from an attacker's point of view. Been very, very popular. And then also ransomware resilience. In that review, TCAPS does a really thorough review looking at capabilities from various perspectives, both business and network and security and architecture, business needs. We'll look at your business continuity plan, crisis management, cyber insurance, legal responsibilities, system criticality, things such as that. The network and security, policy and architectures, looking at identity and access management, your segmentation, backup architecture, incident response, and your threat management. We'll also look at external law enforcement relationships. And then we can also do a deep dive into the technical backup architecture that you have, as well as validate the findings and validate what your program can actually do against traditional techniques that ransomware groups are using today. So on to our speaker. We have a really special presenter today. It's exciting. He's really done a lot in this space with threat capabilities and bringing in so many different areas to boot on this. Rockie Brockway heads up the Office of the CSO. Rockie, take it away.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Really appreciate that. So I'm going to start up with just maybe a little bit of an introduction to a model that TCAPS has been working on for a while. This is our business resilience model. We put this together to really help organizations visualize and effectively communicate everything that really needs to be a part of an organization's security program. So not only does this allow an organization to plan future initiatives from a strategic perspective, and obviously in the intent to improve security posture, but also really helps organizations simply align these initiatives with business. And that's really one of the biggest takeaways, hopefully, from this webinar today is aligning that program with the business and how we can really do a great job of it. So when I look at when I look at a CISO's responsibility, I really think of it from boiling it down into these buckets, right? It's understanding how mature and complete the overarching program is, understanding how effective the team and tools actually will be against known attack techniques. It's understanding the risks to the business, and this is going to be a pretty significant chunk of this particular presentation. How can we improve that kind of risk analysis and ensuring that the program, again, is aligned with business need and requirements. And I think most importantly, effectively communicating the technical priorities to leadership for better business decision making. And that tends to be one of the biggest challenges of any organization, is that, the technical teams typically don't speak the business language and vice versa. So how can we better improve that communication from technical to business, as well as business back to technical? So speaking of alignment, speaking of risk assessment, when we talk about risk assessment, there's really, a number of things that are crucial to precise and accurate risk ratings and analysis, right? It's first and foremost understanding business critical data, right? So within the organization, within the different lines of business, what are the important things to that organization? And understanding things like, if they are unavailable for a period of time, how would that impact different business functions like customer support or even reputation? Also understanding potential financial loss, right? So if these systems then are unavailable or breached, how would that financially affect the organization? Understanding the exploitable vulnerabilities and associated attack paths, right? So there may be a vulnerability, and that vulnerability might be exploitable, but you also need additional things like the next, the next line here, which are threats, right? So actors or something that potentially could take advantage of a vulnerability. Once we all kind of take all of this into consideration, now the risk assessment is really, it's really looking to derive our likelihood of bad things happening, and then the potential associated financial business hit, right? The financial ramifications there. And then finally, kind of to the point a minute ago, and being able to communicate these results in a meaningful way to leadership so they can make better decisions. So when we talk about risk assessment frameworks, there's a bunch of them out there. I'm not going to walk through this. Needless to say, what I have really kind of latched on to over the past 15 or so years is the factor analysis of information risk framework. So the FAIR framework. The FAIR framework was developed by Jack Jones. It is a quantitative risk assessment framework. And certainly, it certainly can dovetail into many of the different risk assessment requirements by different, not only risk management frameworks, but also compliance frameworks, right? So PCI requires an annual risk assessment. Absolutely, we can use the FAIR framework as kind of the basis of that type of assessment. But what it does really well is represent likelihood and impact by the variables loss event frequency and probable loss magnitude. So you can see in the little FAIR matrix there that Jack put together, and I believe that was 2005 when he made this public. That you have our probable loss magnitude and loss event frequency matrix there, and based on where the tweens shall meet, now we have a decent idea of our risk rating, right? So when you look at the framework itself, it's really it's very interesting. The top here is risk, and then the next level you have your two major categories: the loss event frequency and probable loss magnitude. And each of those then are broken down into different areas as well. And so when you actually get down into, let's say, under loss event frequency, down to vulnerability, and now you have below vulnerability this variable called threat capability. And so this is our TCAP. Now, I've been working with the FAIR framework for a number of years now. Actually, honestly, since 05 or 06, when I actually spoke to Jack about this and sat down with him and he introduced it to me. But at the end of the day, when we look at this variable threat capability, there's a number of different ways that I've seen it kind of defined, over these 15 or so years. The probable capability a threat agent can apply against an asset is one. The level of force a threat agent is able to apply is another. And a matter of skills, which includes knowledge and experience, and resources, time and materials. So when we look at TCAP on its own, it's essentially intending to, help us look at threat agent capabilities beyond just kind of the worst case scenario, that we've been breached and absolutely everything went wrong, and we're going to effectively, our business will be losing the most amount of money it could lose and fundamentally alter the way we do business. So there's a lot there. There's a lot there to kind of chew on. So I think it's worthwhile to step back and say, okay, let's make sure we have our definitions in a row here. So let's define threat, first of all. A person, and there's a number, obviously there's a zillion definitions for this pretty, well-known label here. But the one I do like here is a person, group of people, force of nature, etc., that can act against an asset in a way that results in loss. So having defined that, now we have to kind of take a look at threat, the threat capabilities. And the first thing we need to do with the TCAP variable is understand the threat communities. And again, throughout the years, threat communities have been, in relation to the FAIR framework, have been defined a number of different ways. And so here's a few of the ways that I've seen it defined. The first community here with the insider threat, the disgruntled employee, the external hacker, etc. The second community there that I've seen and worked with, kind of breaks it down into, okay, well, criminal, hacktivism, espionage, warfare. Those are some of the big, motivation categories. And then the third one here is, employee unintentional, script kiddie, hacker, organized crime. And to me, actually, threat community 3 really is probably more along the lines of capabilities than anything else. But there's a lot of confusion here. And I'm not really, one of the problems I've always had is I don't really feel that that's telling me a lot, right? So when we look at some of these definitions and the, kind of almost the official definition from the FAIR framework is kind of categorizing it from the perspective of skill set within an overall threat population, right? So the TCAP continuum is simply a percentile scale from 1 to 100, which represents the range of capabilities for a population of threat agents, right? And again, that's coming right out of, Jack's Measuring and Managing Information Risk, a FAIR approach from 2014. Now that again, it's difficult for me to say, okay, that's telling me a lot more. And even Jack himself has actually stated that TCAP estimation can seem squishy, right? Although it is, in his words, it is an effective approach to evaluating some challenging scenarios, particularly, and this is kind of important, if you are able to leverage solid threat intelligence from experts in the field. Okay, so in Jack's own words, we have squishy TCAPs, right? So the challenge now is to how do we unsquishy TCAP, right? And so when I take a look at different ways to enhance the TCAP variable, I really kind of came down to three kind of intelligence aspects that TCAP lacks natively. The first is attack complexity, right? So, an attack path that was successfully able to breach a particular system, how complicated was that? Did the actor or even penetration tester have to chain together multiple different attack techniques to actually get to the final goal of breaching the system? Was it very complex? If it was very complex, if that attack chain was very complex, then perhaps we can make the assumption that there's not maybe fewer attack groups out there and threat actors that would able to actually successfully complete that attack chain. The next one is actor sophistication, right? So we really need to get a grasp on how sophisticated the attack groups are that may be, incentivized from some degree to some degree to attack, our systems. And then the third one, then, talking about incentivization is motivation level. Motivation level is, okay, well, we can kind of compare and contrast, different groups. A nation state threat actor group is probably going to be very, very motivated on a very, very specific target, right? As opposed to let's say a more opportunistic, financially motivated, and we can really kind of associate this with organized crime, because that's effectively what it is, right? But an opportunistic, financially motivated threat actor may not be motivated enough to try to get through really, really well-architected security controls, because there's probably lower hanging fruit elsewhere. So these are kind of the three variables that I initially took a look at to see, okay, can we enhance our squishy, can we unsquishy TCAP by using some of this? So that kind of brings us to threat modeling, right? There's a lot of different kind of frameworks out there that kind of attempt to define and set up frameworks for threat modeling. Some are no longer around. There's the DREAD threat modeling framework. I know that there's also a STRIDE. Attack trees are another way to kind of model threats. But I really, really latched on to Bruce Potter's, what I call the Potter threat model, for lack of a better term here. But this was from his DerbyCon 2014 talk, Threat Modeling for Reals. And it's really very simple, right? So variable actor performs variable action to variable asset, resulting in variable outcome because of variable motivation. And so where can we improve TCAP by aligning to this, to the Potter threat model, quote unquote? When I really take a look at it, there's a lot going on here, but first and foremost, we need some threat intelligence, right? And so from a threat intelligence perspective, there's tons and tons of of TI sources out there. And they range, right? They range from really basic IP block lists and, and even white lists and things of that nature for known command and control, all the way into, services like tailored dark web hunting and things of that nature. So without kind of getting into a lot of details on what threat intelligence, is right for your organization, I will say that, at the end of the day, this data can get stale pretty quickly, but we still need to do some work to kind of add some of our missing intelligence variables into TCAP, right? Because attribution is hard, right, at the end of the day. So enter the MITRE ATT&CK framework has now entered the chat. For those unfamiliar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, it is first and foremost a framework that is organizing the known attack techniques that are out there in the wild, organizing them by tactic, right? So you can see in this, semi screenshot here, privilege escalation is a tactic, defensive evasion is a tactic, credential access is a tactic, and each of the tactic groups have a number of different attack techniques. Recently over the last year or so, the attack team, the MITRE ATT&CK team has, introduced parent and sub techniques. So in this example, you can see that credentials from password stores, which is technique 1555. 1555 is actually a parent technique, and sub techniques T1555 001, 002, and all the way out to 005. So this is really kind of interesting too, because what the attack framework does give us is, and this is what we primarily utilize in our attack path effectiveness assessments, are these data sources, right? So data sources, there are now, I believe, over 100 data sources. It's also recently changed. There's a recent change in the attack framework version 9, where they migrated to a newer data source model. But of these data sources that are in the framework now, you can see that for this particular parent technique, and therefore likely also the sub techniques, if you have tools in your environment that have visibility into command execution, file access, API execution, process access, or process creation, then on paper, you should be able to detect credentials from password stores as the attack technique. right? So that's really kind of the primary aspect of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and how we utilize the attack framework in our attack path effectiveness assessments by looking at the kind of like overall maturity of deployment of different tools in your security stack, and then mapping all of that to basically all of the different attack techniques organized within the MITRE ATT&CK framework to give us really kind of a maturity heat map, right? We're missing some of these data sources in our security stack, so we're missing a whole set of different attack techniques from a detection perspective. And now we can prioritize those, let's say finding tools that have additional data sources that can detect the ones that we're missing today. That's the gist of our attack path effectiveness. However, there's a secondary aspect to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and that is basically, they are also trying to document the known attack groups that are active today, and giving us some pretty interesting information about, first and foremost, potentially where are they coming from? Are they a part of a China threat group? Are they some other type of attack group, a financially motivated attack group? And also, what are some of the kind of primary targeted organizations, specifically from an industry perspective? So admin at 338 group has been involved in attacks against financial groups, economic and trade policy. And they also are now, have really been doing a good job of taking a look at each of these groups and associating what attack techniques they've been known to actually use in the wild. Now, this is a little bit, from a data organization perspective, this is a little bit unorganized, at least in relation to the actual attack database that you can download. And I'll touch upon this in a second. But the reality is here that you have, let's say, our example here is the Copy Kittens Iranian cyber espionage group. They have been known to utilize a number of different attack techniques like hidden window, PowerShell, Run DLL 32, but they've also been known to utilize the software Cobalt Strike. Now, Cobalt Strike itself has a number of other attack techniques that it can actually execute. And in many instances, we've seen in the MITRE wiki on their website, the full picture of the attack techniques that any group is using has to take into consideration both, because you can see that there's a lot more attack techniques just associated with Cobalt Strike than are actually listed as attack techniques that this group has actually been seen to use in the wild. So that's one of our challenges from that perspective, right? It's a little bit of an unorganized set of data. While we can navigate it manually, realistically, it's not quite to the point, at least the way we're looking at it, right? It's not quite to the point where we can download the full attack, database, which we do through a great Python library by Roberto Rodriguez. It's the attack CTI Python library. So that allows us to kind of download the latest version of the attack database. And we have the organized data is very much, focused in on the tactics, the groups, and the data sources. The tactics, techniques, and the data sources, not the groups. The groups are still a little unorganized from that perspective. So we have a little bit of work to do. So we did it live. And thanks to some handy Python foo from my son, Justin Bollinger, we were able to organize much of this unorganized data that links groups to the actual techniques that they use in the wild. So, I mean, effectively what we did is, just wrote a Python script that scrapes, the groups section of the attack wiki and got us to the point where we now have a complete list of each group and each attack technique that they use or have been known to use. Now, again, bear in mind, threat intelligence gets stale really quick. But at least, we're getting close in our kind of quest to unsquishy the TCAP. So a little more elbow grease was kind of needed to organize which groups target what industries. Again, a little bit more of a manual process, where, literally we're looking at every, group. The first one was admin at 338. So doing a bunch of searching and reading any article that was out there, even remotely talking about that group or maybe some of its aliases, and putting together and organizing each group to the industries that they're targeting, right? So we use the NAICS industry kind of classification, North American Industrial Classification System. It's also what the Verizon DBIR uses. So it's pretty common. We figured that was a good standard to kind of utilize when we're looking at the different industries. And we mapped then all of the different attack groups that were out there based on this manual kind of data gathering to the industries that they've been seen to attack. So that then led us to basically building a calculator that we can say, okay, well, now we want to see all of the attack techniques by the groups that are targeting, let's say, the finance and insurance industry. And bam, now we can basically say through a lot of this data mining and threat intelligence that is, coming from MITRE as well as some other sources. It's not just restricted to MITRE, but now we have the ability to say, okay, well, for the finance and insurance industry, the threat actors that have been targeting that industry, you can see that from a credential access, they primarily use credential dumping, right? So we can, and input capture. So this gives us a really, really interesting way. We can utilize this in a bunch of different ways, whether it's, fine tuning purple and blue team exercises to say, okay, well, you're in this industry. These are probably going to be the most commonly seen attacks that you will likely see. So let's make sure that of those attack techniques that are most common to your industry, let's make sure that you have all of the proper logs that can detect those techniques, and making sure that they're properly correlated in your SIM, so that all of that stuff is ready to go in the event and in the probably likely event that you end up running into some of these attack techniques. So back to our TCAP, right? We're kind of getting better here. If we kind of reference back to our Potter threat model, we have some pretty good data for variable actor, variable action, and variable outcome. And we have a little bit of data around motivation. So it's not bad, but we still have a little bit more work to do. So let's talk about variable motivation. So motive or motivation versus motivation level is, there is a difference here. A motive is really, okay, my motive is warfare or it's ideological, but motivation level is different, right? And this ends up being, again, one of our variables that we're trying to unsquish TCAP with. So let's talk motivation level. If an opportunistic, financially motivated actor is trying to gain a foothold in an organization, let's say for financial purposes, financial gain purposes like ransomware, and that actor runs into, let's say, multi-factor authentication, endpoint detection and response agents, privileged account management, managing all like administrator accounts, and access to servers through a VDI, some type of session manager, as well as a highly trained SOC team. Is that financially motivated actor, which is probably more an opportunistic actor than anything else because of the financial gain aspect of this, are they really going to be motivated enough to continue to pursue that breach effort while effectively watching their return on investment evaporate, right? Because remember, this is all a business, right? Data theft, enterprise global data theft is a giant business, and every business has a budget and is watching their margins. And if we can effectively, and this is kind of like the security in a nutshell, if we can help organizations architect controls that delay that attacker long enough, that opportunistic, financially motivated attacker long enough, so that their return on investment starts to approach zero, they're probably going to go somewhere else. Now, that's not always true, right? And there are also different motivation levels, right? The nation state that is looking to steal intellectual property is probably not going to be frustrated and thwarted by some of these controls. They end up, in almost every instance, being much more sophisticated, right? So again, motivation level, actor sophistication, some of these variables that we're trying to kind of enhance TCAP with. So what can we kind of like do with this? Well, I'm using the term loosely, but adversary simulation. Okay, so we can get really, really solid results from just internal pen tests or red team exercises or even purple and blue team exercises by basically saying, all right, well, since attack doesn't actually address anything around variable asset, which is, that's our target, the easy fix here is to, as consultants, talk to the business, right? We need to understand, and this goes back to, the risk assessment methodology that TrustedSec has adopted, talk to the business prior to the simulations to understand what are those most critical assets that are tied to either revenue generation or whatever else, right? What are your crown jewels? What, if these systems were unavailable, how would that impact your organization? We need to understand loss thresholds, right? At what point of a financial loss would fundamentally alter the way an organization does business? And obviously that's going to vary from organization to organization. But yeah, the recovery time objectives, recovery point objectives, all of this stuff we need to kind of gather ahead of time to understand, so that now we can kind of hand not only the attack and threat telemetry of the most commonly seen attack techniques by these groups that are attacking your industry, but also now we have targets, right? And these are the most critical systems within the organization. By handing off that telemetry of what's the most important stuff and how, or basically, the most commonly seen attack techniques by these groups that are targeting this industry, we can hand that off to our adversary simulation teams. They'll go try to target those systems. If they can, now we have a really interesting practical result, which is attack chain complexity, right? How difficult was the successful breach of a business critical system? And again, kind of, going back to the logic that, all right, well, if it took, 5, 6, 8 different, attack techniques to chain together into an attack chain that actually then got, let's say our simulation teams, breaching a critical system, that's probably going to, on the whole, that's probably not going to be something that an opportunistic, financially motivated actor will likely be able to, or even have the patience for, just due to, kind of the business aspect of the return on investment. So we can kind of begin, gauging a lot of these things as well. So now when we kind of look at TCAP, I'll call it, now this is our TCAP on steroids, right? This is our enhanced TCAP by adding the relevant threat groups that target your vertical, adding those groups commonly seen attack techniques, understanding motivation, and then extrapolating motivation level. Again, a lot of this stuff, a lot of stuff related to risk analysis really is, it does kind of boil down to somewhat of an art, right? So we're extrapolating some level of actor motivation. We're taking a look at actor sophistication just based on the number of the techniques that they use in the wild and the software that they use in the wild, and understanding attack complexity through these targeted adversary simulations, right, that are actually using those techniques most commonly seen by the groups targeting your industry. Now we have a much more real world kind of visualization that we can use to make our risk analysis more accurate and precise, not just something like, oh, that's an external hacker. So I think that's pretty good. Now, when we kind of come full circle here, in closing, I want to say that the improved TCAP really helps us derive, again, more precise and accurate risk results, right? The business risk results. And this is bringing us full circle to our CISO, whose job is to understand, at least in relation to risk analysis, is to understand those risks to the business. Now we're helping make those results more precise and accurate, but also effectively communicating those risks and the technical priorities to leadership so they can make the right risk-informed decisions. And that's really what my group within the organization, within TrustedSec, helps our clients do, right? That's we attempt to do all of this through, again, looking at maturity, looking at effectiveness of the teams, looking at the risks to the business through this kind of risk assessment process that we've essentially adapted FAIR and gone into this TCAP on steroids to unsquishy it. And then, obviously making sure that then the program is aligned with business need and requirements, and being able to help organizations effectively communicate all of that so that leadership makes the right decisions. So in closing, I want to, that's really kind of the summary wrap up here. We can take a little bit of time, and Stephen, if there are any questions, that came up through the presentation, I am happy to spend some time and answer them.
Yeah, that's great, Rockie. Thanks so much. Yeah, we do have a couple of questions, and reminder, you can ask them in the Q&A or in the chat. We have a couple in each. So the first one is, are these threat communities formally organized? They seem random, but if formal, I can provide a link or tell a little bit more info about how those threat communities have come about.
So I want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. Threat community is, really kind of one of the initial ways that FAIR was trying to kind of define, right? So the external hacker, the disgruntled employee, blah, blah, blah. That's different from the threat groups that are, from a threat intelligence perspective, there's a lot of data that we're mining out of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Now, I'm guessing that the question is related to threat groups and not the communities that were a little confusing and didn't really give us a lot of information out of. So I'll address it from the threat actor, the threat groups perspective. Yeah, very much organized. When you look at the financially motivated threat groups that are out there, all you have to do is replace, financially motivated. All you have to do is replace threat group with organized crime, right? It really is. So these threat groups that are out there, many of them are very organized. Many of them are very organized in different ways. Some groups are out there actively, looking for specific targets. Maybe that's, PCI or PCI related, cardholder data, or maybe that's, protected health information that, that data is really, kind of interesting because it also helps fuel the illicit, black market drug trades. But at the end of the day, most of these threat actor groups really are organized, at least from the perspective that they want to make money, right? And by and far, month to month, I had on a previous slide, I had a little pie chart, and that showed the July 2021 statistics, breach statistics, or reported breach statistics that broke it down into that kind of motivation. And that month was actually the first time that I'd seen financially motivated threat groups below 80% in a long time. So it's, typically month to month, 80 to 85%, and sometimes up to 90% of the reported threat or the reported breaches are by these financially motivated threat actors. And like I said, that's basically organized crime. And so, so organized is in the name, right? Now, that's not to say that, there aren't other groups out there. Some groups are basically in the business of, ransomware as a service and things of that nature. So they'll create the payloads and things of that nature, and then take a cut of the profits, provided that whoever buys that is successful in their ransomware attempts. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, we are talking about a lot of organization here, and the reality is that a lot of this is just it's the next incarnation of organized crime. So.
Okay, great. Next question: is the intent of TCAP to essentially classify adversarial competency?
Yeah, I would say that that's a pretty accurate description of it. But like, the content within this webinar alone, on its own, TCAP is very, very difficult to do that, right? So you do need a lot of this other telemetry, the threat intelligence, the modeling, and again, based on a lot of the work that the MITRE team has done, they've done a pretty decent job of again gathering a lot of this data that are specific to individual threat groups, and then documenting those techniques. So yeah, I think that's a very accurate just kind of summary of what TCAP should be.
And then to kind of piggyback onto that, is this used outside of FAIR can be used outside of FAIR for other risk equations or risk analysis methods?
Yeah, absolutely. So we use the MITRE attack framework for a number of different things. I mentioned earlier, and Steve, even you mentioned, early on, that we offer our attack path effectiveness assessments, right? So this is really, TrustedSec coming in. It's modeled off of the data within the attack framework, but not the group information. It's more modeled on the tactics, techniques, and data sources aspect of the MITRE attack framework. But we go in, we work with organizations to kind of inventory all the security tools in their environment. We kind of map all of those tools to the data sources they all have visibility into. That gives us kind of a yes or no binary. Based on the tools in your environment, you should, best case scenario, be able to detect these attack techniques. But that's only on paper. Now we have to really kind of take a step back, take a look at how well these controls and tools have been deployed within the environment. Do you have an EDR? Awesome. EDRs have visibility into a ton of data sources. Oh, but it's only on our server farm, right? We have to understand how effective those tools have been deployed to then get a much better idea of how effective the teams are, right, at detecting all of these different attack techniques. So yeah, you can utilize the MITRE, the MITRE framework in a number of different ways, and we're certainly doing that, at TrustedSec.
So another piggyback question. So on the services, would the services be the attack path effectiveness or the business risk assessment? How would you go about putting this together from just an assessment perspective from what your team provides?
Sure. Yeah. So this is really this presentation, this webinar was really focused in on business risk assessment, right? Using the FAIR framework to help organizations better understand and really provide that more accurate and precise risk rating, based on a lot of this new kind of telemetry and intelligence, and again using that adversary simulation aspect of the overall risk assessment to make it even more real world. So yeah, this specifically was really geared to show how we're enhancing our risk assessments. The attack path effectiveness. So again, if you kind of go back to this slide, right? So maturity, effective, and risk, right? Maturity, from a services perspective, that's all of our information security program assessment, our OPSEC, looking at all of the things that TrustedSec wants to see in a mature security program. Effectiveness really then is aligned to our attack path effectiveness assessments, right? So that's helping organizations really get a good feel for how effective the teams are at, not only how the tool has been deployed, but how effective the teams are, taking into consideration things like, third-party managed security service providers, monitoring your SIM and things of that nature. But that gives you the effectiveness aspect is really tied to the attack path effectiveness solution that we have. And then, yeah, the risks aspect of the CISO's responsibilities are really, this is the business risk assessment that I'm speaking to within this, this webinar itself.
Excellent. Another question, can we just toggle the TCAP setting from the top 16% to top 2% and see how that alters the risk? With today's availability of sophisticated attack tools, even newbie threat actors can appear quite sophisticated.
That's a great point. Yeah. So I guess the answer, and I'm not sure, I would have to kind of like, step back and maybe run some models. I never really liked that top 2%, top 16%, but that's personally, right? Myself personally, I never really, but I'm certain that you can, absolutely, let's say, map that type of rating, the percentile rating, to the actor sophistication that we're kind of deriving out of all of this, to really get, we can certainly break it down to, in our risk assessment calculator that we've built. We're rating the sophistication of these actor groups based on the tools that they're using and things of that nature, but also other threat intelligence involved. But yeah, the point is well taken, right? The sophistication. I mean, this is Moore's law, right? The sophistication of a lot of these attack tools are it's setting the bar lower and lower and lower for the less sophisticated groups that are out there, and giving them much more a better probability of an actual successful breach. So yeah, I think it's a great question. I would love to, I probably want to take some time to kind of model that to see what the best way to go about it. But I think the answer at the end of the day is yes, we can do that.
So, can TCAP be expanded or extrapolated to our supply base for third-party risk management?
Absolutely, I would say yes. Taking into consideration, given the fact, I would say that there's so much, let's say, let me reword that. There's such an increased kind of level of kind of going after supply chains themselves, that we can certainly take a lot of the kind of like new and improved TCAP data and look at it from specifically that supply chain aspect, right? So, if threat actor or threat group A is, financially motivated, okay, that's one thing. But, if it's a little bit different and maybe we're talking more along the lines of disruption of, critical services or the theft of intellectual property, anything that could then disrupt something like that from a supply chain perspective, yeah, I absolutely, we can use TCAP to kind of like shift the focus away from the specifics of your organization and branch it out to looking at it from the supply chain, third party management type scenarios. So yeah, I absolutely say that certainly we can use it from that perspective.
And drilling a little bit deeper into that, James asked, regarding supply chains, can you touch on the most common difficulties in applying fair TCAP to third-party vendor risk assessments?
I would say that it's probably, along the same lines as applying TCAP, the difficulties of applying TCAP to just anything else, right? So here it's kind of difficult. The challenge, I would say, that adds a little bit more complexity to, the supply chain aspect of all this is, all right, what is the supply chain, right? And so from a process perspective, during that, kind of business side of the risk assessment itself, where we're talking to business leaders and different line of business leadership, understanding the critical aspects of their organization and what their critical systems are, that's where that conversation has to then, take place, right? So let's talk about your supply chain. What does it look like? Do you have redundancies in your supply chain? If this one supplier over here, gets a successful ransomware attack, do you have a backup plan? Taking all that into consideration from the third-party risk management perspective is where I would start first, right? But you have to understand what all that stuff is, and what I've found throughout the years of kind of building all this and executing this kind of methodology is that you can walk into a room with different different representation of different business lines of business, and one person will be like, yeah, well, this is our supply chain, and another group will say, well, this is our supply chain, and they have zero insight into each other's supply chains. So it even gets more complicated from that perspective, and that's really to me illustrating the importance of sitting down with a good representation of different areas of a business to get kind of weed through all that stuff and get the right results, so that now we have a better picture of what that supply chain actually looks like. And now we can begin applying a lot of this kind of TCAP, the motivation, the sophistication levels and things of that nature to the potential threat groups that may want to target that industry.
But maybe a little bit, drilling into that specific for, is there, as we get these third-party risk assessments or the questionnaires, basically, they're going to go back into some, grouping or some formula of how they're rated as to high risk. Would there be a simple way to apply this more holistically? Maybe that's not as deep, but it at least would provide some value or some additional insight into just, do you have this control? Do you have that control? Do you have this control? Do you do this type of questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly a number of different ways that you can get to less accurate and less precise risk measurements, right? I mean, you can realistically, you can take a program maturity model, irrespective of what that is, and also have conversations. So hand in hand. Let's say we're looking at the cybersecurity framework, right? And we're looking at the program maturity. We can also then make assumptions based on conversations that we also have with the business. So we still want to have those business conversations to understand criticalities. But yeah, we can get to let's say a less precise and less accurate estimation of risk through things like program maturity. And even, to a certain degree, potentially even some of the effectiveness stuff that we do. We do also what we call a business alignment assessment, which is, if our business risk assessment is broken into 4 phases. Phase 1 is, what we call business systems analysis. Those are the business conversations. Phase 2 is the adversary analysis, where we're doing the kind of research on the threat actors and the relevant threat actors. Phase 3 is then our adversary simulation. That's our technical teams. And then phase 4 is the risk assessment itself. Our business alignment assessment is actually just those first 2, right? So it's the conversations with the business and then that adversary analysis. And that's really more intended to help an organization start to better align just an overarching program with the business, not necessarily getting into more of the technical details of simulating the actual or the likely attack techniques and things like that, and then getting to a more accurate, precise risk rating, right? So there's a lot of ways that definitely organizations, if it's not, let's say, feasible or within the budget to get this to our business risk assessment into all the weeds that we've kind of built up here, to make it more real world and more accurate and precise. Certainly ways that you can get more general estimations of risk, including program assessments and things like that.
Okay, great. One from Mark. Attribution seems to play a disproportionate role in this TCAP assessment methodology. How can we validate the attribution piece to make sure we're not building a model that's fundamentally flawed?
I think that is the question, and it's such a good question. I don't know. Our sister company, Binary Defense, they do great threat intelligence work, but and so they're the organizations like that, they are they're on the front lines. They're in the dark web, black markets and things of that nature. They're getting real, recent threat intelligence and things like that. So I think first and foremost, you would need to, either be at that level or have that available to you, right? And admittedly, right, I said it in the webinar here. Threat intelligence gets stale quickly, right? So yes, it is a problem. I understand that it's a problem, especially with the stuff that's in the MITRE attack framework, because they're only updating it, I don't know, every 3 to 5 months or something like that. So that is certainly a challenge from my perspective, and I would say that my best answer is we're still working on it, right? That's a big challenge.
And last one up here so far is how often do you see any of the threats being used in either a qualitative or quantitative method? What kind of, and just for me, what percentages on average of the engagements you're on and the companies you see are doing actual, even any kind of quantitative risk assessment?
So the way we built our model, and the answer is almost all of them are doing some kind of quantitative, because the way we've built our business risk assessment is, let me step back, right? So we've got qualitative, we've got quantitative. There is an in between there that affectionately is referred to as semi-quantitative. We've built our business risk assessment to essentially be semi-quantitative, because I found over the years that the added extra time, effort, money to get everything down to potentially a penny in a quantitative model, there's not a lot of added value versus being able to have a conversation with a CFO and say, okay, at what high range of a financial loss would fundamentally alter the way you do business, whether that's filing for bankruptcy protections or going after additional lines of credit, right? What loss does that look like? And now let's kind of work backwards. What's that critical range? What's that? And associate that to dollar ranges. And that effectively gets us a semi-quantitative, risk assessment. So almost every single one of our business risk assessments look at it from that semi-quantitative range perspective. Every once in a while, we'll get an organization that has basically tells us, we don't really want to do it that way. Our board is used to just seeing high, mid, low. So let's change it up and just do that the qualitative aspect of it. But almost all of our business risk assessments are using this. I'll call it our enhanced TCAP fair-based semi-quantitative risk analysis.
All right, fantastic. That's great, Rockie. We're up against it. Thanks everyone for joining today. Definitely feel free to reach out. We've already have a couple of folks that are looking to get some additional information. We're always happy to set up a call with Rockie even, and go over any of the specific questions that you may have, or again, different services that you might be interested in. But great job, Rockie. Thank you so much for taking the time today and going over TCAPS with us.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for spending some time with us.
All right. Have a great day.
Take care.